Hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay and everything is looking fine. Welcome to a live stream. It's been a while since I've done a public one like this, but I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. Today's plan, I'm gonna be doing some mending, and I've got this pair of jeans from my husband that I'm gonna be patching up these holes here. And I've also going to be working on writing some letters, which we will chat more about. But I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We'll just have a nice hangout and a nice mend. Oh, I've got a little pile of mending projects here that I'll see how many I can get through. But thank you so much if you're joining me live, and please say hi in the chat, and we'll just hang out and do some sewing. If you're working on your own mending project, definitely let me know what you're working on. I'd love to hear about it. And I think we'll kind of jump right into it and see, I don't know, see what happens. But yeah, so today is the end of the last day of Fashion Revolution week, which it's been quite a busy week. But hopefully you guys have been, I don't know, taking part in some way, maybe attending events or following some of the campaigns online or tagging a brand in Instagram. There's so many different ways to take part. And I think, every year I'm always really excited to see that more brands seem to be taking part and explaining more about how things are being made, and just more people seem to be getting involved and participating in some of the campaigns like hashtag who made my clothes, and or doing like alternatives and other kind of just like sharing different ways. There's like the clothing love story campaign where people are sharing pieces of clothing that they've had for a really long time, or doing like the alternatives, sharing like secondhand pieces, or sharing slow fashion or rentals or swaps or that kind of stuff. It's very exciting to see. I'm just going to see if I can. There's always like a bit of a weird thing with the chat. I'll just pop out the chat so I can see it a bit better. Perfect. Hi, welcome. So yeah, I think today, like I said, there's kind of a twofold plan. I'm going to be doing some mending. And then if you look down below in the description of the video, I have a link from Fashion Revolution Canada to letter templates. Now, these are for Canadian provinces based on the minimum wage and the living wage in different Canadian provinces. But if you want to grab one of those templates, feel free to use it to customize it to wherever you live. All the information I guess you really need to know for it is what's your minimum wage where you are, and what a living wage is where you live. And typically that information can be found. There's different places that have calculated living wage. If you just search like living wage, your country or your state or province or something like that, there's often some estimates out there that you can use to kind of customize that template if that's something you want to do. And we will chat a bit more about doing that, but I want to start sewing so I can get that kind of going, and then we can just have some more conversations about Fashion Revolution Week and what's been happening and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I've got, let me pop up, let's see. I've got my little sewing project down here. Maybe I'll do this one. That's a little better. So yeah, so these are a old pair of jeans from my husband. He wears them all the time. These are some mud jeans, and he always keeps his phone and his wallet in the pocket. So I don't know why there's like two holes here. I know like the bottom of his phone tends to wear out this part. And yeah, so he's got two holes kind of in the pocket area. Hello, welcome. So we're going to be doing a couple little patches right along there. And I think I'm going to start working on that, and then I'm just trying to sort out all my supplies that I've got going on here. So I've cut out two little patches here out of some fabric. I'll show you guys here, which is very similar to his jeans. This is like a worn canvas kind of fabric. And so I'm thinking of putting this under as a backing and then stitching on top. Now there's kind of two ways that you can patch, well, there's lots of different ways, but I guess in terms of like general ways to patch jeans, you can do a more invisible patch, or you can do some visible mending. There's of course tons of different ways you can do visible mending, but I talked to him and he said that he's totally down for some visible mending, so I might try to do some cool little stitching, play around with that a bit. I definitely am not the best at hand stitching and embroidery kind of things, but I think we'll have some fun with it. And he said he doesn't care if it how it looks, and he's totally down with some visible mending, so we'll do that. But the other way, if you want to have a patch on your jeans that isn't very visible, the best way of doing that is to get some fabric, either from another pair of jeans, or oftentimes you can get like any kind of scrap fabric you have. But if you're looking specifically for denim, try to see if there's anybody in your city or wherever you are that has like secondhand jeans or other jeans or bits of denim. Maybe there's some fabric manufacturers, because if you can ideally find a denim in the same shade as your clothes, that would be best. But I mean, you also don't have to worry too much about it, but try to get a piece of fabric in the same shade and then get thread that's the same color as your denim. And basically all you do to do a more hidden mend is you put the patch underneath, and then you, with your sewing machine, you just kind of zigzag back and forth and back and forth across it. And as long as your thread is a good match to the denim, it does cover it up very nicely and is pretty hard to see. And you can also, if you want to Google like patching denim or something like that, there's some really great examples, but it's really easy to do with your sewing machine. Honestly, the hardest part I think is just trying to get as good of a color match as you can to your denim. So yeah, so that is a more invisible way of patching, but we are going to do some visible mending here. So the first thing I'm going to do is this is the patch I cut for this one because it's a little long, like wider this way. And then I cut this little one for this one. So I'm going to go in and put this in and pin it in place just to hold it for now. And then I'm going to go and start stitching. And I haven't decided yet. I'll make a call. I got this like darker gray embroidery thread, but I think it's honestly too, here, I wonder if I can move my little box here. It might be a little easier to see. I'm gonna try seeing if I can move this. Oh, sorry guys. What am I doing here? Okay, never mind. I can't move my little box. I'll just kind of go a bit more to the side here. Anyways, so I got this gray embroidery thread that I was thinking of using, but I honestly think like this is too close in color, and then if I'm gonna go with something so close in color, I might as well just use, or like intentionally try to make it invisible. So I think instead of doing that, I'm either gonna do, I've got this like dark green, which might be kind of nice, or do more of a classic white stitching out of this cotton. I think I might do this. Just go with a more, instead of doing any fancy embroidery stuff, I might just do little stitches out of the cotton. Okay, I need to make a decision, so that's my decision. All right, so I'm gonna go under here and pin this under, and then just try to get this all as nice and flat as I can, and then we'll start stitching. And yeah, please let me know if you're oh nice, yeah, I mean green would definitely be good. I just like the green is quite nice too. I'm honestly a bit worried about using embroidery thread just because I am not very, I like so rarely do any kind of like work with it at all and do any sort of embroidery. Uh, it's been so long. Well, I did a small embroidery embellishment project recently of just like some little flowers. Um, and that was a bit of a, a bit of a surprise in terms of it being a little harder to work with than I expected, just because the thread. It's just a different technique, I think. Um, so I might stick with the plain thread just so I don't embarrass myself with really bad embroidery skills and try to do anything too fancy. We'll keep it simple. So yeah, I'm just pinning this in place and trying to get this as flat as I can. That is not a pin. And please let me know if you guys are working on anything, if you're mending or just hanging out, or if you've got any sewing projects on the go, or any sort of DIY projects. Or if you're just here for writing letters, I will explain that soon right away too. I just want to kind of get this all ready. So I think that's looking okay. Just want to make sure it's sort of as clean as, or as flush and flat as I can. Uh-oh, I just lost my camera. I don't know what happened. Okay, give me a sec. I don't know why the camera just turned off. Did it also turn off for you guys? It must have. What's going on here? Okay. I'm not sure what's going on with this camera. So I'm gonna just switch to to this camera view and just show you guys here what I'm doing. I tried to get all fancy and do a nice overhead shot, and I've done it before with this overhead camera and it hasn't just randomly turned off. So I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe it doesn't have enough power. Let's try sticking that all together. We'll see. We'll see if it comes back or not. Anyways, I'll just work on this camera and show you guys here what we're up to. But that's unfortunate. Hello, welcome. Ben, my husband, is the person that does all and knows everything all about all the technical stuff here. So he's gonna come help. Thank you, Ben. Ooh, knitting a wrap. That sounds lovely. I just was working recently on a knitting project and I haven't done knitting in a while, and I think I'll post about it soon because the last sort of step of it was to finish. I knit a hat and I wanted to put a really big pom-pom on the top, and I've never actually made like a big pom-pom for a hat, and I wasn't sure how much thread to use or how much yarn to use and sort of how to do it, and I followed a tutorial and I ended up with this. I think I used too much yarn and I ended up with this super puffy, like really chunky, squishy pom-pom. Definitely bigger than I was planning because I thought that I would have to cut off a lot around the outside to trim it down, but I didn't actually end up having to cut off that much. Hello.
Your camera's broken?
Yeah, the top camera. Ben's here.
Hello, everyone.
The top camera just all of a sudden stopped working.
Okay.
I don't know why. It's okay though if it's like actually broken or something, but if it's an easy fix, it would be great to get it back on.
Easy, quick.
Yep. Thanks for bearing with the live stream stuff. I'm just getting my thread going. It's okay if it's not working at all.
Yeah, I know. Just try again.
It's just never done that before.
Yeah,
Like with the Patreon live streams. It's never just randomly turned off. There we go. Thank you.
Hopefully it stays on. That's fine.
Thanks. Oh, I'm gonna move this a bit. All right, great. It's fixed. So I'll pop out to this. Not sure what I was saying. Oh yeah. So I've been doing a lot of, not a lot. I'm planning on doing a lot more like embellishment type projects. So I want to get better at embroidery and hand sewing and do some cute details on some clothing. And so I thought doing some mending is definitely a good start before I get really into doing any kind of embellishments. And I just need a bit more practice, I think, with hand sewing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to start kind of above where the hole actually is. And I'm going to do little tiny stitches just going across, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth across the whole thing. And hopefully, I mean, I've done mending like this before. I definitely don't have like a good, so this technique is actually based off of a Japanese technique. I believe it's called sashiko. I might be mispronouncing that, but people do some really beautiful and intricate little patterns. And I believe they technically use a longer needle because the easiest way to do that is to feed the needle through a whole bunch of times and then pull it. So they have, I think, like quite a bit longer needles to make that a bit easier. And I also think that with doing it sort of properly and getting it really nicely, people will mark their rows and even mark their stitches already, like pre-mark everything onto the fabric. And that way when you're stitching, you can make sure that your lines are really straight and all your stitches are really even and it looks really beautiful. But I am not going to do that. I'm not going to be super careful. I'm fine with this looking a little bit more kind of rustic and uneven and not really, yeah, not being too careful with it. But there, you definitely can do mending like this in a much more delicate and beautiful and straight and nice way. I'm gonna have to reposition this camera a bit though because I have to like lean. Hello. Gives me a little bit more space to work over here. Push my laptop back out of the way. There we go. That's maybe a little better. All right, and then I'm just gonna keep going and doing that all the way across, making sure to get through so that I'm actually catching the patch down below. And then this is just basically securing the patch to the denim, and we'll reinforce it and make sure the hole doesn't get any bigger. The awkward thing is like I can't grab it very easily because just the jeans are ripped, not the pocket bag, so I can't really like stick my hand in the pocket bag to support it because I don't want the pocket bag to get stuck. Like I don't want to catch the pocket bag in my stitches. Maybe this is a little easier. Kind of hold it this way. And then still sort of support the back. And then if I can finish this up, I do also have another mending project that I think I'm going to do a more invisible mend with. But we'll see how much time we have today. This might take a while just because it's cute little hand sewing. Okay, so now basically I'm gonna, I don't know how well you guys can see that there. So I'm gonna take the needle and I'm gonna keep it straight and I'm gonna try to poke through multiple times, keeping my stitches as even as I can. But again, like I said, I'm not gonna be too worried about them being perfectly straight or even or anything like that. And then we're just doing tiny little stitches across like this. So that's all I'm doing to mend up these patches. And yeah, I think that's really, I mean, this type of mending isn't very complicated. You don't at all have to be a skilled sewer or someone who has a lot of experience. You know, try it out. If you're a bit worried about how it's going to go, you can always unpick these type of things. So I would say just try it and don't be too afraid to do some hand sewing, even if you don't have much experience with it. Like I said, I'm really not a big hand sewer. I wish I was a lot better at it, but practice makes perfect. We can all practice together and then soon do really amazing, beautiful hand sewing. If you look up visible mending, if you're interested in it, there's some really, really stunning and beautiful things that people do. And I would love to at one point be able to, to do some mending like that. There we go. Just cute little stitches. And then so something you can also do is you can do stitches like this, and then some people will go back through and do other patterns or do like little X's or little like crosses or something like that. There's lots of different things you can do with just this really simple technique. And I'm going to make sure to go a ways past the hole as well, just so I fully cover, not a ways, like maybe a centimeter or so past the hole on either side, and then we're maybe roughly a centimeter above the hole here, just so we can try to really enclose, like cover the whole area so that the threads don't end up pulling outside of where we've already stitched. Okay, so now that we've got this going, let's chat about other things that we're up to as well. So mending, did I just seriously poke myself? No, it's not bad. Okay. Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, so so someone's asking, they said they have several things to mend that have been laying around for ages. Are you also waiting until it's unavoidable? I am the same. I have a pile, constantly have a pile of projects on the go and things to mend. And with stuff like this, like my husband has, I think, been for months. He's either been, or I keep seeing his jeans and I'm like, I really should fix those for you. And we just keep putting it off and I never make time for it. You can't see, but off camera here, I've got a pile on a chair of like 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, maybe even 5 pieces that all are either in progress sewing projects or things that need to be fixed or things that need to be, something needs to be done with them. Either they're worn out and need to be like recycled or taken somewhere. I have a huge pile of stuff here that is all things that I need to do something with that I constantly am avoiding. And it just keeps piling up. And so I try to make time, I'm trying to make time to actually get through that, especially because we're moving this summer and I don't want to move this pile of stuff that needs to get done. So I'm hoping I can get that all done before we move at least. But that was part of the motivation of doing this is Fashion Revolution Week was closing out and I often do a live stream for my Patreon supporters. We do a monthly sewing live stream and I just have this pile of stuff and I thought, you know, Fashion Revolution Week is a perfect time to tackle some of these mending things and I can kind of make an event and do it and get at least 1 or 2 projects done. So yeah, you are definitely not alone. I have a whole pile of things and I'm really bad at finishing projects. I'm also just really bad at finishing projects that I start because I'll typically get an idea and start working on something and then maybe I'll get to the point where I've cut out my pattern or I don't know, done something and you know, I feel like I'm just at like a more boring point, I guess, of the project. So typically it happens around like cutting things out. So like I'll cut out my fabric or I'll cut out my pattern pieces and I'll maybe start cutting out the fabric and then, you know, life happens and stuff. And then instead of jumping back into that project, I'll get another idea for something else I want to do and I'll sort of leave projects half finished or like the finishing of the clothes is another thing. So I might sew something up, but then it needs a little bit of extra finishing. Maybe it needs some, I don't know, hand sewing or something. And that's the part of the project that will get left for ages until I need to very consciously make time to finish it up. Oh, Which is a tricky stitch. Um, but yeah, I think mending clothes is something that is obviously really important for sustainability and all that kind of stuff. But I also think that it can be, like our culture and everything moves so fast, and we're so this is getting into a much deeper conversation, but something I've been thinking about a lot lately, though, about how we tend to have so little free time with just, all the pressure to work harder. And a lot of it stems just from this whole capitalist culture of we need to keep working and work as hard as you possibly can. And in theory, we should have more free time than we've ever had historically because we have so many conveniences and so many things. But anyways, this is all to say that most of us don't have very much free time, and mending can take a lot of time. And so, I totally understand why people think that it's easier to just go buy something new instead of fixing something that they already have. And I think also, especially if you're not very experienced with mending, it can seem really daunting and it can seem boring. And so I hope that, I don't know, we can maybe make mending a little bit more fun, or, help people learn or just try some new skills and make it a little bit more enjoyable instead of something, I guess, that people feel like they have to do and that they then don't have time for. Because I think it actually can be really relaxing and really enjoyable doing like little stitching and focusing on something. But I just don't think it's often seen that way. It's seen as like a chore that we have to spend our free time doing. And I get it, I get why people then don't necessarily want to put time into that and would rather just buy something new. So I hope that we can change maybe a little bit of the skill set, like make people feel a little bit more empowered to actually mend things, and then also make it fun. Maybe by doing stuff like this. I have no idea. I don't know. Is this fun for you guys to at least like do a task like mending with other people or in some sort of more communal or social situation? I don't know. Definitely something I've been thinking about a bit. And yeah, definitely with kids, it's hard for sure. And to like start a task like this and then, your child needs you and you have to constantly put it down. My daughter, who's now 2.5, while I was knitting recently, she was like fascinated by the yarn and was constantly like taking my ball of yarn and playing with it. And it's tough to find time for sure. Like she's napping right now, so nap time is a good time, and evenings and everything. Yeah, it's so true. And actually, like it it is seen as like a more of a rebellion, and that's really interesting that to point out as well, because I saw something a while ago, and so I'm not going to remember it exactly, but it was talking about the punk movement and this idea of, patches and holding things together with safety pins, and people often like purposely destroying their clothes so that they could then patch them together to get that whole very like mended, patched up look. And it was really interesting to think about, and how, that movement was obviously like done as a more rebellious thing, and this idea of like visible mending and mending being used as a design detail versus as like a necessity. And there's, I don't know much about it, but there's a lot of really, really interesting cultural things around mending and different approaches and skills that people use to mend. It's beautiful. Like it can be a way, I think, to make clothing even more special instead of seeing it as like, I don't know, as something that you have to patch because there's a hole. Like there really is some ways that people just make clothing so much more beautiful with mending. And I would love to see more of that and to see people maybe talk about it more and to really view it as a beautiful thing. And then maybe more people would be interested in doing it. I don't know. Yeah, I think I mean, for me, it's definitely more fun to, and I also am more motivated to, or I was just like tucking all the little loose threads from the side, like inside. So I'm going to try to catch them inside so they're not fluffing out. Um, yeah, for me, it's definitely more fun to do something like this and to hang out and chat with people and do it kind of with other people than just by myself. Because probably if I was doing this by myself, well, first of all, it'd be a lot, it would take me a lot longer to actually make time for it. But I would honestly probably just like have a movie on or something. Um, I don't know, which is a little less fun than hanging out and chatting. Especially now with, the past few years of uh, pandemic stuff and just not talking to many people. It's nice. It's nice to not just sit down and, I don't know, do this while watching a movie or something. It's nice to be able to chat a bit and to hear about, what other people are working on. And thanks. Yeah, I was so yeah, I think the contrasting thread definitely is obviously much more of a statement. Like you can see it, it's there. And I think it really depends on the piece. Like jeans, I think lend themselves really, really nicely to visible mending. Also just because denim is such a strong structured fabric that it's a lot easier to do stuff like this on denim. Um, and yeah, and Ben said he was cool, or he actually wanted something a little bit more visible, so we're embracing it and doing the contrasting thread. But if that's not a look that you like, and I have heard people say that they really do like the look of visible mending, but they then don't necessarily know how to wear it because it feels like more of a, I guess, styling choice, or I don't know, maybe they feel like that then changes the look of the garment and they're not really sure how to wear it anymore. So yeah, I for sure think there's like a right garment and maybe a right time and place for visible mending. But in general, like jeans, I think are really, really good. But there also are ways you can very nicely and visibly mend your jeans, which makes them look close to new, at least from a distance. Like obviously if you went and looked at them close up with the visible mending or the invisible mending technique where you kind of do the stitches back and forth. From far away, you can't see it at all. Like if you were to definitely look it up close, you could see the stitching. And they often do that, especially in the inner thigh, which is an area that often needs to be patched. And, if you're doing something like a patch in the inner thigh, you don't necessarily want it to be very visible. So people are like, what's happening there? Right? So that for sure, I think is a great place to do something like the machine stitching technique to just reinforce that area, and you can get a lot more wear and longevity out of your jeans then. So I'm going to start on another row. See, again, my stitches for sure are not super perfect and even, but I'm not bothered about that. Let's chat about living wage and letters, because this is another thing that I personally really want to do, and I think it's a fantastic, easy way for anybody to kind of get involved and have their voices heard. So I volunteer with Fashion Revolution Canada, and we are, of course, coming up to the end of Fashion Revolution Week. And this year, if you're not aware, the theme for Fashion Revolution is money, fashion, power, and it's about the wealth imbalance and wealth distribution in the fashion industry. And so one key part of that is wages and conversations around living wage. And so what we've done, at least in Canada, is we put together a bunch of letters for different provinces that people can use as templates to write to their provincial government, because that's who's in charge of our minimum wages here, to basically explain that, you know, minimum wage in many, many, many places does not actually match a living wage. And that is honestly crazy when you think about it. And this is like beyond just the fashion industry. This is, of course, everywhere. But it's crazy to think that we have this knowledge about what it costs to live in places, what it costs to live in certain cities, and the governments aren't paying people or like making it so that everyone can actually make enough money to live. Like, that's just not something that's like, there's so few countries, I was looking into it, that where minimum wage is anywhere close to a living wage, that it's crazy. It's so crazy to me. So anyways, that is a very simple thing that we can all do, like use our voices to encourage that minimum wage is raised to actually match a living wage. And so if you do want to take part in this letter writing campaign, there should be a link down in the description of this video to our Canadian letter templates, which if you're Canadian, feel free to just grab one of those for your province and you can customize that. If you're not Canadian, you can also still grab those templates. You might just have to change a few more things regarding what the minimum wage is in where you live, and of course, if there's any kind of like specific government terms that are more applicable to where you live, like please adapt those. But you can for sure use those templates as a guide. I think our team that put together those templates did a really, really great job of those letters. And then all you need to do is figure out where you need to mail it to. So again, depending where you live, I'm not sure exactly who is necessarily in charge of your like minimum wages, but figure out who that is and then just email off one of those letters. And it's a pretty easy thing you can do. Like if you use a template like that, I don't think it'll take that much time, like maybe 10 minutes if you have to do a bit of extra research. But you should be able to simply Google things about what minimum wage is where you live, what a living wage is, or at least an estimate of a living wage is where you live. And then, yeah, you can fill that out. And I mean, like this is very applicable for sure to the fashion industry. But I think if just globally minimum wages met a living wage, we would all be a lot better off. And it also really helps with sustainability. There was a really interesting article that Elizabeth Klein wrote. I'm not sure when exactly, like maybe a few months ago, or maybe it was last year even. But she wrote an article talking about how if everyone is paid a living wage, that would greatly improve the impact that everybody has, the environmental impact, because there's like many reasons why, but a big argument that she made was that, you know, if we're all being paid more, and if we're paying, so like let's say garment workers, right? If garment workers are being paid a living wage, then likely prices across the board will go up. So fast fashion will be a little bit more expensive. You know, your typical any kind of clothing production, mostly in terms of like people that currently aren't being paid a living wage, would go up in price. So there would be a larger effect of people not being able to buy as much. So they'd have to buy less and maybe invest a little bit more in each pieces. But because everyone is making more and making a living wage, people would also have more income to be able to buy things that are a little bit more expensive. And just kind of across the board, it's a good article. I wish I had a link for it. But she basically was talking about how across the board this would help us produce less and be able to buy less cheap stuff overall and buy things where people are actually paid really well, which inherently has a lot of sustainable which inherently has a lot of like sustainability impacts and environmental impacts. Because of course, if just as, you know, as humans on the earth, if we all bought less stuff, it would have a huge sustainability or a huge environmental impact. So that was a really interesting argument, because to think about living wage is not even just necessarily like a social issue, but also as being an environmental issue and also having an environmental impact. I thought that was really interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, you should look up, like, search what a living wage is. There's lots of really good organizations that have done living wage calculations for tons of different countries. Search what a living wage is in your country, and specifically even in your city if you can find the information, because that was really interesting for us in Canada. Is like across the board, I think Canadian living wage, the average is about, like, should be about $18 an hour. But if you look at some of the really big cities, especially the really big cities that garment manufacturing happens, they're very expensive cities to live in. Like Vancouver and Toronto are super expensive to live in. And they're two of the biggest garment manufacturing cities here. And there, the living wage is like significant, or for sure, I think it's like $21 or $22 an hour there. So even if you have like a country average, some cities can be a lot more expensive, and living wage there actually needs to be quite a bit higher than the country. And that also makes it tricky then too, if you're writing politicians, is you do have to sort of look at where the breakdown is in terms of, like, if you live in a city that is very expensive to live in, do you encourage them to raise minimum wage in the whole province to match that city, or is there maybe some kind of, I mean, we as citizens don't necessarily have to worry about those kinds of technicalities, but it is kind of good to keep in mind, maybe if you're writing your letter, and if you are in a city that is very expensive to live in, pull probably the British Columbia template might be a good one, because I know there's a big discrepancy in Vancouver in particular for cost of living. That one might be a good one, or Ontario if you're wanting to help to use our Canadian ones. Those might be two good ones. I haven't read those two specifically, but because those provinces do have very high costs of living in certain cities, it might be helpful for you. And something else to kind of go along with that too is so many people, and like I'm for sure guilty of this too, think that as a default, minimum wage does match a living wage. And I mean, it's something that I thought too. I just assumed that, you know, the minimum amount of money people were paid would be enough to live on. But that's not at all the case. Like, where in my city, minimum wage is about $15 an hour, and living wage is, I think, 18 or like 18.10 or something, which is a huge discrepancy. That's $3 an hour less to live on. And I think we need a lot more awareness around that as well, because if people just assume that minimum wage is living wage, then, for example, if you are making minimum wage, you might be really wondering why you're struggling to, make ends meet and pay the bills and pay for everything, and think that, instead of thinking like that the issue is that minimum wage is not actually a living wage and it's like a cost, and, it's the cost of living, you might think that the issue is yours, and maybe, that you're not budgeting well enough or whatever it is. And that's not the case. Like, it's not the people's fault that they're not being paid enough to actually live. And also, likewise, other people might see somebody who's being paid a minimum wage and really struggling, and they might, again, blame the person versus actually blaming the government and the cost of living and everything that's making it so that somebody physically can't live on the amount of money that they're being paid. So there needs to be a lot more awareness, I think, around the fact that minimum wage is not a living wage and needs to be increased to actually match a living wage. Because that was something really interesting doing more research about this, is just how little, how most people don't know that minimum wage isn't a living wage. I just have a tiny knot in my thread. It's like a very, very tiny little knot in the thread. I'm just gonna leave that. I think it's okay. Oh boy. What am I gonna do with that? Okay, it's okay. It's okay. It's just like a tiny little lump there that I can't get out. But I'm gonna carry on and not unpick that because it's sort of in the middle where it's all fluffy. You can kind of see it right there. I don't think it's too bad though. Oh, definitely too. And that's the thing, like it's so tricky because if you have inflation happening and yeah, companies are like raising prices because they're having supply chain issues and that kind of thing, then it takes so long for any kind of government regulations to catch up to that, that there's never a good time where minimum wage is actually matching living wage and inflation. So even now, let's say if the governments respond and say, okay, we're raising minimum wage to match a living wage, like how long is it going to take before there's then another gap and then that needs to be caught up again? Like there's no perfect solution, but I think at a bare minimum things should try to somewhat match a living wage right now. And these last couple of years, like there's a ton of inflation happening right now, a ton of prices going up. So in theory, all of these living wage, like we can only use the numbers that are available, and from people who have done research into this, but it should actually be even higher than what the current numbers are, because these are for sure going to be based off of cost of living calculations that are now a little outdated. So anyways, oh, no worries. So yeah, so living wage is a calculation, and there's different formulas that different companies do who actually do living wage calculations. So they all vary slightly, but living wage calculations are basically a an amount of money that a person needs to be paid to meet all of their basic needs. And so this is looking at, all your basic cost of living calculations. So like rent, food, transportation. You can see different living wage breakdowns. Oftentimes they might include things like, yeah, like paying for healthcare, paying for, your general expenses, utilities, household expenses, that kind of thing, for an average person to be able to actually live in a city. And it does depend on the place and, what the general, of course, lifestyles and costs of people are, for example, and amenities available, that kind of stuff. But it's essentially a wage that just allows you to live and meet all your costs for living a very basic, normal life. You can see if you look at, so I've got a post actually up on the blog specifically about living wage, and that goes into a little bit of detail on what does a living wage actually mean. And then I believe in that post, there should be links as well to companies that calculate living wage. And so if you want to check that post out, you can also click through and check out the links of some of those companies, and they'll give you a better breakdown of exactly what a living wage calculation typically includes. But yeah, it's essentially just all your costs to live and being paid enough to pay for that. And it does, of course, vary greatly from place to place and even city to city. Like, for example, where I live currently, we have a really terrible transportation system. It's not the worst, but it's definitely not great. And so I even think that, like, calculating transportation costs, for example, at like a bus fare isn't even that realistic because so many people don't have good access to like buses and public transportation. So there's obviously like various situations like that too. Um, well, okay, so does a living wage imply healthy food or just food? That's a good question. I believe I'm not like sure exactly, but I believe those kinds of wages look at things like average grocery costs per person. So, I mean, I would definitely hope that it includes, your healthy food and buying things like fruits and vegetables and stuff like that at a grocery store. I don't know exactly where they would necessarily get those specific food calculations from, but I assume it would be looking at like average costs that people typically pay for groceries, taking an average of that and like per person and using that as a living wage calculation. And also, living wage calculations will depend to based off of families. So, like, a wage for one person is going to be different than a person that has, like, a single person than a person that has dependents and children and things that they need to pay for. So there is also, I think, a bit of an averaging there in terms of like what you need for a household income, and trying to find an average that still allows somebody that has dependents to be able to cover their costs as well. But yeah, if you head to my blog and the living wage post there, you should be able to link out and check out some of those things. And if you are in Canada, you can check out the post or the folder that I've linked down below. And that has a breakdown, I think it has a breakdown of um, the wages across provinces. It might not, but if it doesn't, anyways, if you are in Canada, you can check out the links down below, and I believe they reference where we got the statistics from, so you could check those out to see a bit more information about how they're calculating those costs for Canadian cities. But yeah, otherwise, if you live somewhere else and you Google a living wage in your city or in your country, there should be a cost breakdown in terms of what they're actually using to calculate those. And like I said earlier too, it is a really tricky thing to calculate, and it is based off of a lot of averages and whatever information is currently available. And I for sure notice like some organizations that do living wage calculations for sure tend to err on a more, I guess, conservative side, and some err on a bit more of like, I don't know, just like erring on the idea of paying people more money so that it for sure covers their needs versus like paying versus a living wage being like a very bare minimum to cover your needs. So that does vary quite a lot, but still, even then, like almost all those wages, even the lower ones, are often quite a bit higher than minimum wage calculations. So at the very least, they almost always need to go up in most places that I've seen. And I was really surprised to see that like where I live, it's $3 is a big difference per hour between a living wage and what we currently have as minimum wage. Like if you think about a day of work and a week of work, like $3 an hour adds up very quickly. So anyways, please join in, write your government, do a little bit of research about minimum wage where you live. I think it's a campaign that I think anybody can take part in and also anybody really benefit from. I often find that with fashion specific campaigns, I don't think they get like sort of fashion industry specific things. I don't think they get as much attention as they deserve because unfortunately, a lot of people sort of write off fashion as being like the fashion industry as being maybe something that's sort of frivolous and isn't taken seriously. And so I think that something like this living wage campaign, which is a bit more generalized and it applies to all industries, I hope is something that will be viewed a little bit more seriously because it isn't just specifically fashion related. It's unfortunate that that happens, but I've seen it a lot where, yeah, people and like press and stuff, especially too, they're like, if you if you pitch them something about, you know, issues in the fashion industry, journalists and stuff will basically be like, "Oh, like I don't cover fashion." And it's like, "Well, it's not about fashion. Like we're not here to talk about I don't know, spring trends or anything. We're here to talk about, you know, environmental issues and ethical issues and that kind of thing." But they still just write it off as being like, "Oh, that's like fashion." So yeah. So I'm hoping that this campaign at least, maybe, hopefully, like fingers crossed. I mean, will hopefully get a little bit more attention and be taken a bit more seriously. And I mean, the conversations around living wage that I've seen during Fashion Revolution Week. Oh, sorry guys, I'm like doing all the stitching right where this little thing is. I really need to figure out how to move this. How do I move this? Because it's like in not a good spot. Oh, I'll try to stitch over here. The conversations I have seen around the idea of living, or the idea like around living wage and minimum wage have been really great. Like we also did a campaign here in Canada asking people who make clothes, like home sewers and DIYers, knitters, to share the amount of time that it took them to make a garment and what they would have to be paid if they were making a living wage for where they lived. And it brought up some really, really great conversations and people discussing not only like the amount of time that goes into making a garment, because again, that's something that most people, if you don't sew yourself, it's really, really hard to understand how much time and labor goes into creating clothing. And so people were sharing like, "Hey, I made this top and it took me like 6 hours to sew." And granted, I mean, it's one person making it versus a factory. Like obviously factory production is a lot faster. But I think even just getting an idea of that labor that goes into making something, and then, you know, the person says like, "Yeah, it took me, you know, 4 hours, 5 hours to sew. If I paid myself, I would have to be paid like over $100 to make this garment." And so, you know, it just really doesn't add up, the fact that we can then see similar garments being sold at fast fashion retailers for $5, for $10. Like when you account labor and material costs and the entire supply chain plus profit markups, like it's just so, like, even if you think about, you know, costs in different countries and all that kind of stuff, it still is like, how is this being produced for so little? And having people bring up conversations like that and just share the effort and time that it took them to make something. So that was really, really cool to see. And I loved some of the, like, reading some of the responses people had to just reading people bring up some of those conversations and talk about the costs. And I think just more awareness, like I was saying earlier, just even more awareness about the fact that living wage is a huge issue across the board and that it does take a lot of time and labor to make clothing was really really beneficial, I think. Yeah, like over Fashion Revolution Week. So that was something I was really excited to see and to have worked on, and I hope that a lot of those conversations will continue after Fashion Revolution Week. And I saw a few people even say like, this was so interesting, even just for them personally, to do a bit more of a cost breakdown and to look at how much time they put into things, because especially if you're sewing at home, you often don't keep track of time, you just sort of do it. And people saying that they wanted to share that more. So that was really cool, and I hope that, yeah, that continues. Yeah, and that's another like fabric is so well, it's tough because fabric, like if you're a home sewer, fabric is super expensive. But for some of these mass production companies, they also pay next to nothing for the fabric, which I am so surprised by because, you know, fabric is the end product. Like there to make that fabric, there was so many people and stages involved. Like let's say we're talking about cotton, right? Somebody had to grow that cotton, had to water that cotton, had to harvest that cotton had to be cleaned, and then it had to go, to be milled and spun and like dyed and turned into fabric. And then that fabric is being purchased for like like maybe like I don't know, $1 a meter, maybe even less. So like just thinking about yeah, how did they buy that fabric, and then also how was that fabric made so cheap, knowing how many stages there are even to just get it to fabric. And that's something that I always try to talk about when it comes to issues in the fashion industry, like if I'm doing a press interview or something like that, because people always want to know, oh, like what are the biggest issues? And it's like this industry is so much more complex than most people think. And there's so many different stages and so many parts of the supply chain that every stage of the supply chain has issues. It's not just about the person sewing the clothes or the fabric. Like there's so many stages in between, and there's so many people involved. There's people who are like cutting out the patterns, there's people who are finishing it, there's people who are spinning it and farming, and like there's just so much involved. And I think we're so like here where I'm in Canada and many other places too, at this point we're so disconnected from how clothes are even made that we don't see it as being this really complicated supply chain. And so I hope with things like Fashion Revolution stuff, we are getting, I guess, a bit more behind the scenes and a bit more transparency about how clothes are actually made. So some of these things are put into perspective a little bit, where we can think about like why is this, how is this possibly made for $5? Not only the person sewing it, but how was everybody along the supply chain paid so that this shirt could then come out at $5? Plus the company's making, billions of dollars of profit. I mean, I'm gonna leave that there because like I'm already getting like a little a little fired up about this. Um, but yeah, more transparency is definitely very important to understanding how complicated these problems are. And here we are in my mending. I'm going to do my last little stitch. So this is, I'll hold it up to the camera a little better so you can maybe see it. This is what I've done just across here where this little patch is. I'm kind of thinking I might do something like a different stitch maybe around the edge, the border, just to kind of like, or I might leave it like that. I don't know. But yeah, so this is like a little visible mending patch. Like I mentioned initially, I did not, mark my lines out, and I wasn't too precise about making sure all my stitches were even or anything like that, just sort of eyeballing it. So it definitely is a bit more of a, I guess, rustic, casual look, but that was what my husband wanted. And I don't have a ton of patience to do everything very perfectly. So that's how it looks. And I think like when you look at the jeans from far away, there is, obviously I used a contrasting color, so the thread is a little bit more noticeable on the pocket, but it also isn't super like, here's a patch, very, very noticeable, I guess. And I'm also assuming, well, maybe not, we'll see. But this is a cotton thread, and these, I was just thinking like it might pick up a little bit of dye and go a little bit more gray from the denim, but these jeans are pretty old, so I don't think they're necessarily going to be losing any more dye. But if you had a pair of jeans that was like a very dark denim and you didn't wash them that often, which you shouldn't wash your jeans that often. It might, like if you used a white cotton thread, for example, it might pick up a little bit of blue, but I don't think at this point these jeans will. But anyways, that's the first patch. I'm going to move on to the second patch. It feels really sturdy and secure below here, so I think it'll hold up well. I'm just going to jump through to the inside to tie off. I'm like going through the hole to try to tie it off, which is a bad idea because I'm definitely going to make the hole worse. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go in this way to just poke this through and tie this off. And then we'll start working on the second patch. So here is about, just so you guys can see roughly. So I cut the patch. So I stitched about an inch or a centimeter wider than the hole, and then I cut the patch roughly about another centimeter wider than that. It's always better to err on the side of your patch being a little bigger, just so you for sure have that space. And then you can always go back in later and trim it down if you want to do that, if there's excess fabric, but I would definitely go larger than smaller when cutting out your patch. We'll pop that through. Also, if any of you guys do write letters to your politicians, let me know. I'd love to hear. Okay, so I'm just gonna tie this off. Just do a little knot through back here, and then that's one down. That wasn't too bad with all my chatting. How long did that take? Maybe about an hour, but I for sure could have gone a little faster if I wasn't chatting. So not too bad. An hour in the evening set aside to patch a pair of jeans. Okay, just focusing on this. Okay. So I think I'm going to do the same technique and the same kind of pattern for the second patch. And that way they'll sort of look similar, like they're matching. There we go. Okay. I think it's really great to write to your politicians, because so many people, and again, like I was the exact same before. I didn't know how to do it or what to say, and I honestly wish, like in school, we had been taught, here's how you can email your government representatives, because that's one of the big ways that you can actually have your voice heard. And it really is a numbers thing, where if they get enough people contacting them and saying, we want this change, you know, that's what is really going to spur some of those changes to happen. And so I would always say, like, if there's something that you care about, put aside some time, write your politicians, because yeah, like that, your voice really does count. And the more people who can do that, the more change, or the more likely change is actually going to happen. And you know, those templates, I've done like a little bit of research into this, but those template letters, like those email templates and stuff like that, are effective. Like a lot of people wonder, like, should I use a stock template? They can be effective. Those forms where sometimes it's like, oh, you can just hop online and fill out a form and it sends it right away to your government rep. Those can be good for like a numbers thing. So, you know, if they get hundreds of those emails, they're like, okay, but they're very likely not going to read each one because it's just like a stock thing. So my understanding, and I don't know a ton about this, but my understanding is that the best thing to do is to, if you're writing a letter, is to use a template, but then customize it a bit. So maybe include something personal about why it matters to you personally, or Use your own subject line, or just, yeah, like customize it a bit so that they are more likely to read it and not just see, the subject line, for example, and say, oh, it's another one of the stock letters, and just kind of ignore it. So you do want to do something to make it a little bit more personal. Or if you're brave, you can phone them. Phoning can also be really effective, sometimes more effective than emails. Very likely you will just be leaving a message on a voicemail, but you can keep it short and sweet. There are oftentimes you can read the template emails as well. So if phoning is more up your alley, or if you're like me and you hate phoning, feel free to write emails. I feel like everyone though now hates phoning, so maybe not everyone, but most people I know do not want to phone anybody. But that can be a really effective way to actually make sure that they get a hold of it. And something I heard, if you even have access to it though, is faxing, because they cannot ignore it if it's printed off in their fax machine. I personally probably wouldn't fax anything, but I've heard it's a really effective way to make sure that they actually get your letter and your information, because it will print off in their office. But that also wastes paper. But anyways, if you really want your voice heard, apparently faxing is a good way to do it. So yeah, I would say, obviously do whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you have time for. But if you are gonna do the email forms, which seems to be the most common thing that people do spend like a few extra minutes just to kind of customize it a little bit, do a custom subject line or something like that, just so it doesn't appear to be exactly identical if they're getting multiple emails in. That was the tip I got and what I tried to do. It would be great to have to do letter writing with pen pals. We could all write letters and then send them to the government together. I honestly have not written a letter, like a physical letter. I'm trying to think, like, have I ever actually sent a letter to a person? Maybe when I was like a lot younger, when I was a kid, I would sometimes send postcards to some of my friends if we went on a trip somewhere. I think that's it. I don't think I've written a letter to anybody wow. Yeah. There's something really beautiful about handwritten letters, but it is unfortunately not a hobby that I've ever really done. So I've never had a pen pal. Also, I think like sending a physical letter to your politician, I think would also be sort of effective in the same way that faxing something is effective, but I just don't know if it then would be worth like the extra time and money and paper and I don't know, all that kind of stuff. But I do assume that it would be equally effective as something like faxing. So I'm just pinning out this. I keep smacking it because I want to make sure it's really nice and flat. Yeah, maybe, yeah. It could be just a general issue. Although I have friends my age who write letters. I don't know. It's just never been a thing I've ever done. All right, so again, this is I just keep smacking it. You know, it's not necessary, but I'm trying to just get it really nice and flat underneath so that the patch and the top are nice and flat, and then I'm gonna fold or just gently push these little extra fluffy threads. I could trim them too. I don't know if that would be better. You know what? I think that probably would be better. So these bits that are, so there's like the few threads that are running straight across, and then there's a couple extra thread bits that have pulled up. I'm just going to trim those to be about the same as these, the sort of fluffy edge around here, just so that, Because what likely will happen is with time, those little threads will poke back out. And I mean, you can trim them when they poke back out again too. But just so the patch isn't like fluffy and has little bits of thread sticking up, I'll try to keep that as flat as I can. Yeah. I don't think there's anything else to say about this patch that I haven't said about the other one. I'm going to be doing same thing, pop in, do some stitches. I definitely do see the benefit though. Sorry, I'm very thirsty. I definitely do see the benefit of getting a longer needle. And so I think, if you were to do a lot of mending like this, I'd probably recommend getting a longer needle because it would be a lot faster to be able to do like 10 stitches all at once and then just pull through. I can maybe get, let's see, well, we'll count them, how many stitches I can get on one needle before I have to. So it's 1, 2, oh, might need to pin it up here. I took out the pin because I was going right underneath it, but I think I need it still. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe. I can for sure do 4. I could maybe do 5, but that's about it. And it's getting like quite thick and I have to pull the needle through. So having a long needle would be nice. Not necessary, but for sure if you're doing a lot of it. Yeah, I mean, and that's so interesting too, like with texting, and I don't even make phone calls ever. So the idea of like phoning a politician to me is like, whoa, I'm not gonna phone anybody. I don't even make phone calls to the point where I stopped paying for a phone number and I was just using like online things because I was like, I don't ever make phone calls. Nobody calls me. And then there's like a couple instances where somebody was trying to phone me, like some whatever like bureaucratic thing, I'm sure. Or like doctor's offices or something like that. And they're like, we need a phone number to get a hold of you. And it's like, oh, I guess I'll get a phone number again for just these very few times that I ever actually need to use a phone. So yeah, I totally get when people are like, I'm not gonna call my politician because I'm probably not gonna call them either, but I will send an email and we can send emails. It doesn't take too long. So yeah, 4 stitches on a regular needle I can do, at least at the size I'm doing. Not too bad. So maybe it's like 3 needles across worth, something like that. Oh, this is unrelated, but I'm excited, so I'm gonna share it. So if you guys, I don't know, maybe you saw it, maybe not, but last year around this time, I was starting on the 1 year 1 outfit challenge, which didn't go as planned. It was based on the Fiber Shed book. The Fiber Shed concept though, and Rebecca Burgess, she in that book writes about her own personal challenge where she decided to make an entirely locally sourced outfit or entire wardrobe. It wasn't even just one outfit. She did her whole wardrobe from her local fiber shed within like 100 miles or so of where she lived. And the book is fantastic. I highly recommend reading it if you're interested in like any kind of localized clothing production, wool farming, regenerative fibers, anything like that. It's fantastic. But anyways, I got super inspired by that book, and a lot of people from the fiber ship concept have done this, like they call it the 1 year 1 outfit challenge, and the idea is to, over the course of the year, create yourself a whole outfit entirely locally. And so I set out to do that last year. I did not complete it, but I'm gonna get into a bit more about that and why. And so I've given myself a year extension. A big part of that was like COVID stuff where I not only wanted to make the clothes, but I also wanted to film like actually go out and visit the farms, visit the fiber processing places, get some footage, and just like with, yeah, it wasn't really that realistic for me to actually go out and do a lot of the stuff I wanted to do. And also, unfortunately, like where I live, there is for sure basically the only fiber available is wool. And there are some people doing some like interesting wool farming and finishing. We have one mill in my province, which is pretty cool, and I still plan this summer to go out there and film it. But nobody's really doing a lot in the capacity of like looking at fiber as and wool farming as like a regenerative farming practice and as like an actual viable industry, because right now it's very much just like a byproduct of meat farming in most cases. Like I said, there are some people that are actually farming for fiber and doing it in a more ecological way, but it's not happening much in my province. And that was really like what I wanted to learn about and to really support with the fiber shed movement. So anyways, this year, in a few months, at the beginning of June, I have booked a trip to go visit a farm in Manitoba, which is a couple provinces over from me, who is extremely into fiber farming and regenerative farming and looking at wool. And I believe they've also done some experiments with linen, because we apparently used to have linen and linen production in Canada, but it basically like disappeared. It was a thing in the 1800s, but completely disappeared. The whole industry disappeared. And so they are looking a bit into piloting, reviving that. And yeah, and the people who run this farm are just amazing and so knowledgeable, and I think have a lot of really great ideas and are doing super cool stuff. So anyways, my plan, and I've booked the trip, so it's for sure happening, is to head out there to get a tour of their farm and their processing, and to share that with you guys, like do some videos about it, to learn about all the cool things they're doing. And I'm very, very excited about it. And so that, because that was the type of thing that I was really hoping to be able to learn more about from the 1 year, one outfit experience. So even though it's not like local, like 100 miles or so from where I live, I still think it's close-ish, and it's still looking at like fiber production and textile production in Canada has almost completely disappeared. So I'm looking at it as more of a Canadian fiber experience versus like a hyper localized project now. So yeah, I'm very, very excited to share that. I'll definitely be doing some videos, and I'll for sure be filming some interviews on my trip to the farm and share with you guys what I've learned, because I think they'll be really cool. And they also do like natural dyeing, and they do so many cool things. I want I want to just like go live on their farm for a while, but I don't think that's possible. But yeah, so I guess as an update, if you're at all following that in any way, I've completed one of my three pieces that I was going to do for this challenge. So I have knit a hat, which is what I was talking about earlier, my knitting project. I completed a hat for it, but I still want to do two more. The hat is from like local alpaca wool. But I still want to do two more pieces from like more clothing pieces versus just accessories. I'm still not sure exactly what I'm going to make yet, but I want to do something from this place's wool and maybe do some felting. And then I don't think it's possible. Like I was hoping to get some linen, because I know people do farm it, but based on my more recent research, it sounds like there's absolutely nowhere that can process it in Canada currently. So There's just no options that currently exist. But I'm hoping to learn more from this farm about, like I said, they did do some kind of research and pilot project into linen to see if they have any idea of if it is even possible to process anywhere or if anybody is doing that. And then maybe we can. So it would be very, very cool if I could do some Canadian linen and not just wool, because wool is the only fiber we currently have. And it's so sad, I think, to see how in many places, like, these industries used to be very common. Canada actually had a surprisingly large textile industry and clothing manufacturing industry, but then it all just disappeared and everything shut down. And I've heard even that there's like warehouses that have just been abandoned for like 50 years or something that still have all of the equipment to do some of this fiber processing, but nobody knows how to fix them up or how to use it. And so they're just like rusting and kind of rotting away, which is really sad. So anyways, yeah, stay tuned for that. It'll be happening. I'll probably share, I'll definitely share a bunch of stuff while I'm actually there on Instagram. And then for sure there'll be some kind of video about my trip and experience going to the farm and learning about regenerative wool farming. Yeah, it's tough. It's it's I like one of the biggest challenges I found with it too is, first of all, there's like researching, like there's just not much information, and a lot of the people that are doing localized fiber production are just like, and are not necessarily selling it publicly. Like they'll, sell some wool to a friend of theirs, or they, weave a blanket. It's much more of a community-based thing versus like you can go there and buy so much yarn or like fabric or whatever. So as a person who isn't part of that community, it can sometimes be really, really hard to find people that are actually doing that. And that was something I really struggled with. But the best thing that I've figured out in terms of trying to source like locally made textiles is the fiber shed movement, and looking for if you have a local fiber shed where you are, because that is a way where people are, connecting over fiber production. But I think if the fiber shed movement didn't exist, it would be next to impossible to try to source any kind of local fiber. Is there anywhere that produces mulberry silk? Yeah, a lot of, well, what do you mean by, so I'm not sure exactly what you mean by mulberry silk, because unless I'm incorrect, all silkworms eat mulberry leaves. But yeah, there's locally, like, Canada for sure does not produce any silk, unless it would be like a very small batch private thing, maybe like somebody raising their own silkworms, but I don't think we have the environment for silkworms. But there's quite a few companies producing like Peace Silk, which is a much more ethical silk. I can't think of any right off the top of my head, but I have a roundup on my blog of places that you can source more sustainably and ethically made fabrics, and I'm very certain that some of those places carry Peace Silk, and different silk options. Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, I was like, I'm not sure about mulberry silk because I think all silk is technically mulberry silk. But yeah, check out so if you go to my blog and just search like fabrics, or if you search fabric stores or something, my green closet, something like that, you should be able to find the directory that I've put together of different fabric suppliers. And yeah, I'm very certain that some of those carry piece silk and different silk options, and that might be a good starting point because I can't think off the top of my head of anyone like that directly makes silk, but I know there are fabric suppliers for sure where you can get it. Oh, sorry. Again, I'm doing it over here. Here's my stitching. We're about halfway through this patch. So this hole is a lot bigger than this one. So this one, you know, I had very little stitching kind of in the middle of it. I think I just had one row of stitching and then the other two are right along the edges. So for this hole, I'm just going to keep doing the pattern across the hole, even in the middle, where I'm just basically stitching over my patch. And that should, well, it just kind of keeps it looking consistent. In theory, you could just go around and just do the edge of the patch or the edge of the hole as well. But for this, I'm just going to keep going through this big hole, and then we'll secure down the other side once I get to that area. I actually have a big chunk of silk that I don't know what to do with, and it's honestly stressing me out a little bit. So one thing that's amazing about making clothing is quite often people I know will come to me and will say like, I've got this fabric, or I have this, you know, vintage dress or something like that. Like, can you do something with it? And I almost always take them because I want to give these things a new life, and I, you know, don't want them to just sit around somewhere or go in the trash or anything like that. But so one of my relatives asked me a few months ago if I could use a huge piece of white silk that she was given. I think she said like she's had it since the 70s or something like that. Somebody gave it to her to make something with, and she never ended up using it. And it's like quite a dense silk, and it's white. And I think I have like 4 meters or so of it. And it's really beautiful. And yeah, I'm just so stuck with what I'm gonna make out of it. It's not like very shiny silk. It has a little bit more, like, it's got some sheen to it, but you know, it's not like that like super shiny kind of satin weave silk. And it has a pretty good density to it too. And because it's white, and silk dyes beautifully, so I could for sure do some dyeing with it, do some natural dyeing even, and color it something. But yeah, I haven't come up with a good idea or a good thing to make with it. Curtains would be, I don't think there's enough for curtains, or I could only do short curtains out of it. Palazzo pants, ooh, that could be really nice. It's got, yeah, like it has a good structure to it. So I think something a little bit more tailored, like pants, could work really well. Anyways, it's on. I wonder if I have it. Do I have it here? Oh, no. Yes, I do. I have it here in my, I'll show you guys. I have the bag that she gave me sitting underneath my table here. So I can show you guys, but this is the silk. So it does have quite a bit of a sheen to it. It has a little bit more than I thought, but it's not like a super satiny kind of weave, and it's like a mid-weight. Oh, it's actually shinier than I was remembering. But yeah, there's like quite a good amount here. So lots of options, but yeah, I'm like very nervous about about what to do with it because I do want to make something that I'm for sure gonna wear and that I'm gonna get a lot of use from and yeah, but I'm gonna use a lot, but I don't know what to do yet. So I appreciate the ideas. Um, oh, so yeah, I for sure want to do some kind of dyeing with it because I think, I mean, white silk is obviously very bridal, so I'm probably not going to leave it white, but I'm going to do something with it. So we'll see. I like the idea of doing maybe some kind of tailored pant or maybe a dress. I don't know. I've been sort of thinking about different things, but oh, thanks for joining us. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you tackled some of your mending. That was yeah, my hope with this. And also let me know if you guys would like to do this more often. I would totally be down for it if people are interested in hanging out and watching. So yeah, there's a lot of definitely a lot of fear about what am I going to make with this and is it going to be something that I don't know, does the fabric justice, I suppose. But I guess also at the end of the day, like this fabric has just been sitting around in storage somewhere. So as long as I make something from it that I'm actually going to wear, I think that's, you know, the best option. Yes. Oh, good. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe this could be like a monthly thing. Could just have a monthly hangout, chat, mend or sew or do something textile related. I agree with the palazzo pants. Yeah, I think that I really like that idea too. I think that could be really cool and it does have a good structure for it. I guess the thing I need to think about is, well, what color I would dye it and what I would wear it with. To make sure that I had some good options. The one thing that's a little tricky about dyeing something so big like that, like a pair of pants or even like if I'm dyeing the fabric before cutting it, is it can be hard with natural dyes to get a very consistent color. So it can sometimes look like a little bit splotchy. Just because, like, especially dyeing fabric, you have to get it all in the pot. You have to constantly stir it in order to make sure that the dye is touching everything to try to keep it as consistent as possible. Because if areas are folded or sort of scrunched together, you sometimes don't get as much color there. So I think I would have to do something with the intention of not having it be like a perfect solid color, so that because it very likely won't turn out to be a perfect solid color. So it sort of leans into that whole, you know, tonal, hand-dyed, variegated type of look versus it being like, yeah, like this is a solid clear color, not splotchy at all. Just because then I know that it's the chances of that actually working out for me dye-wise are pretty slim. You can for sure do it, but it takes a lot more like babying of the dye pot, lots of stirring, lots of checking, making sure it's scoured perfectly so that the dye takes up everywhere. It's just a bit more complicated. Oh, well, thanks for hanging out. Blue or madder red? Yeah, so I could do like an indigo dye, which would be really lovely on that. I just did, speaking of madder, I just dyed a dress that I made in 2013 when I was graduating from fashion school. It was part of my final collection, and I don't have it here nearby, but I'll post it on my Instagram soon because so basically I know we're a little off topic, but but I had this dress that was like a very light organic cotton, like a voile. I don't know how to say that word. I've just realized I've never actually said that. Like a very, very lightweight organic cotton. And part of my thesis collection was about using hyper localized and like food waste dyes and stuff. So I had dyed it with like onion skins and coffee, and I think maybe it was madder or maybe it was some kind of berry. Anyways, I'd painted on these stripes. So it was like white with these long stripes of color that I painted on with natural dyes. And I always thought it looked really cool, but the colors just I never wanted to wear them. So I had this dress after and I held on to it because I really liked it and I also put so much work into it. And finally this year I was like, okay, I need to dye this dress so that I'll actually wear it. I'm going to over dye it. So I over dyed it in the rest of the madder that I had left over. I had powdered madder from Maiwa. And I don't think I had enough. So I ended up getting like a pinky type of color that came out, and it doesn't look bad. It's more of like a light red. I think it's less pink, a little bit more of like a light red, but I was hoping to get like a deeper red, and I got this beautiful deep red in some of the stripes where it was dyed over top, and then I got obviously a little bit more of an orangey red where it was yellow, and then more browny red where I had the coffee stripes. So I think it looks cool, but I still don't know if it's... Anyways, the madder red looks great. It's just a little too light. So I'm really debating if I'm gonna dye it again in madder. I might just wear it for a while. I'll share it with you guys somewhere because it's nice to finally have it be a little bit more wearable than it was, and I'd like to see how deep I can go with madder. I've seen some people share photos of madder that has this like very, very beautiful deep red, and I just have never been able to achieve that. So I don't know if it's the type of madder I'm using. It's probably more so the technique that I'm using where I'm not doing something correctly to get as deep of color. But that's going to be something I'm going to be experimenting with more this summer to see if I can get a really nice red. Although with the stripes, it might make it kind of hard. Anyways, I'm rambling. I'll share it with you guys at some point on my Instagram if you're interested in seeing that dress. Take a large brush, dip into color, and splash onto the fabric. Ooh. Yeah, so that you very likely would have to use probably a like Rit dye or Dylon or something like that. I assume. I have seen people do some really cool stuff like that as well. Oh, okay, I'll have to do more research into this. But you can dye wool with Kool-Aid and it dyes really well. It's kind of really weird to think about, but the acid in the Kool-Aid and then the colors of the Kool-Aid work really well with wool fibers. And you can just like mix up some Kool-Aid powder and dye your wool. It does make it like it makes it a little rougher, I would say, but it works well. And I wonder, I'm gonna research. So what I was thinking when you said that is, I wonder if people dye silk with Kool-Aid, because silk is also a protein fiber and dyes very similar to the wool, or if it actually, if the acidity in the Kool-Aid or something about the colors damages the silk at all, or like changes the hand or something. I'll have to do some research into that, because that could be a fun way to maybe get some like, yeah, do something, some sort of surface dyeing splatter or like some sort of pattern would be easy to do with that, because you could kind of paint it on or do various things versus a natural dye, which often has to sit for quite a long time. And you can't really do a lot of more detailed things. So I know, right? That's exactly, it's like this dyes wool fantastically. Like, what is it doing to my insides? Turning them hot pink or something like that. Yeah, it was really weird. I remember learning about that, and we did some like wool dyeing with Kool-Aid in when I was in school, and I have never had Kool-Aid since then. I don't think I drank it much before then either. But it was crazy to me to think that you could just take this Kool-Aid, dip the fabric in, and the color of the Kool-Aid came out very, very similar to the color of the final thing. So all that color just got sucked right in to the wool. Um, yeah. But, I mean, if you want to do a fun fabric dyeing project, it's also really great to do with kids, is Kool-Aid dyeing. I don't think it works very well on cottons though and stuff like that. Or maybe it does. I don't know. I'd have to do more research too. I'm not super experienced with Kool-Aid dyeing. I just know it is possible. But I'm gonna research and see if it does harm the silk in some way. My feeling is that it might damage the feel of the silk a bit because I recall the wool just being not as soft after because of whatever is in the dye. Yeah, Kool-Aid, I assume it's like an American thing. I don't know actually where it's all available. all I all I remember is from like very few times in my childhood getting the little packets. I've never even looked for them since school, since we were doing that Kool-Aid dyeing project. And who knows, maybe also they've changed the formula of Kool-Aid since then and it no longer dyes wool as well. I'm not sure. But it's something I'm going to look into because that maybe could be a good way to do some cool, like you said, some cool like pattern on the thing. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's a thing. I think I've only had it for a few times, like when I was a kid, and that was about it. So I used the rest of my thread that I'd cut initially, and I don't think I have enough to do. Maybe I do. It's gonna be tight. Look, this is all the thread I have left, and I have to do one more stitch. Should have cut a little more. All right, I'm gonna very carefully do one more line of stitches and then tie this off. Yeah, so anybody that's in countries, I guess, besides Canada, I assume that America's the same, but do you have Kool-Aid? Is Kool-Aid an international thing or no? What a weird conversation. Didn't think we'd be talking about Kool-Aid. I imagine, as with most things, that probably in other countries, the colors are regulated differently and it might not actually dye wool as well. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know I saw something about like somewhere in the UK, they can't even use the normal sprinkles that we have because the colors are regulated and like the food dyes that we're able to use here you can't use in other countries. So I imagine Kool-Aid most likely has those same food dyes that are banned in other countries, that we drink and can dye wool with. Who would have thought that, we'd be using Kool-Aid and stuff. But anyways, I digress. I'm gonna do some research, see if it's possible, maybe try it. I would definitely try it on a sample piece or a different piece of silk before actually trying it on that fabric. We'll see. Maybe we can do some really cool, interesting, bright colors. Asian tea, that's not a sure type of drink. Okay. So yeah, I guess if you haven't heard of Kool-Aid, it's basically like a powdered drink and it comes in little packets and it's basically just sugar. It's a lot of sugar. Or sometimes it's not even sugar. I think sometimes you add your own sugar, but it's like flavoring and color and that's all it is. And you mix it in with water and it makes like these very sweet drinks that of course taste like extremely fake strawberry or punch or whatever it is. And it's like heavily marketed towards kids as being just like a fun sugary drink. But in relation to dyeing, because you basically get these packets that are just dye and flavor, and from what I was told is the acidity, because they're quite acidic. I assume it has just like citric acid or something in there. The acidity helps the color bind to the wool. So you can use it, you can mix it up, and then whatever color the Kool-Aid is, and they tend to be very vibrant colors. So there's like bright fuchsia and bright blue or bright green, depending on the flavors. You can get that color to transfer and stick to your wool, which is crazy to think about, like you said, right? That we're also consuming this, but it's a thing. So yeah, so that's what Kool-Aid is and how it's related to this conversation. Anyways, I appreciate your guys' ideas, and I'm definitely thinking about some options, especially pants to possibly make from that that silk. Oh, and with the dress I was talking about, it's like a very loose that I dyed with the madder. If you don't follow me on Instagram, Instagram is probably going to be where I'm going to post about it. That's like the only pattern that I've ever made that I actually have available as a digital form. So, because almost like all my patterns, well, they're like back there somewhere. All my patterns are just paper patterns, but that one was one that I actually digitized. So, if for some reason, if any of you guys are interested in actually using that pattern and sewing a similar dress, let me know, because I'm considering turning it into like a printable pattern. Because I have the files and I don't think it would be that difficult to make them into like printable paper sheets so that it can be like printed off. So yeah, if you're at all interested in that, I guess when I post about it on Instagram, hopefully soon, let me know if you've got thoughts. Because I've been considering maybe turning some of the patterns that I have and the clothes that I've made into actual commercial patterns that other people can use as well. Because I've spent all this time making them, and now they're just hanging here. So it'd be cool for them to, I guess, get some use. All right, we finished that. I'm just poking it through for the last stitch. And of course, the last stitch, I just poked myself really hard. Not bleeding though, which is good. Finished up this patch. I'm gonna go this way. That's gonna be easier. Okay, we'll tie this off. So there's our two little patches. This one is, I cut a little bit bigger, so I'm gonna go back in after and trim down some of this excess stuff. And it, depending on the type of fabric you're using, it can be a good idea to either use pinking shears or leave, I guess, a bit extra so that it can fray. So, because you don't want your patch fraying into the hole at all. I'm just gonna tie this off. Oh, and I'm right. It's gonna be hard to do a little knot. I'm right at the edge of the thread. That worked out perfectly. Like stitching my knots through the fabric. Try that. Hopefully we've got enough. So that wasn't too bad time-wise. Did that one go a little quicker? Yeah. So with all the chatting and me not being super focused, it took about an hour to do these to do each patch. So, I mean, it's definitely a time commitment, but I think if you've got a little bit of time to spare, maybe if you're doing something like, I don't know, watching a movie, it's for sure not bad. And yeah, I mean, you guys seem, if you guys are interested in doing more, like maybe a monthly mending day that we can hang out and motivate each other to maybe get through some of our mending stash, I think that would be a lot of fun. So that's tied off. I guess I'll just snip this little thing, and I might wait till, because these are kind of covered by the pocket bag. Well, this one isn't really. I'll probably take pinking shears and just trim this down a little bit more around the edge, just so they're a little smaller. But yeah, that's it. We've mended up this pair of jeans, got these two little visibly mended, stitched patches. Hopefully Ben is going to be happy with that. I mean, this is what he said he wanted, so. And I think it adds a really interesting detail. And like I said too, I did sort of a square shape. Like I could maybe do something around the border or like shape it differently to add a little bit of visual interest. There's so many different things you can do. This is just a very, very basic mend. But I'm glad that I finally got around to these and I don't have to keep thinking about the holes in his pockets whenever he wears these jeans. So yeah, we're gonna, I think, wrap up there. This was a lot of fun. This is really nice to just hang out and work on these projects. That's so great. It's so nice to hear that you guys are finishing up some of your mending projects too. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me and for hanging out and doing some mending. And also, just as a reminder, check out the letters down below. And it's honestly like you can write up a quick letter and do a little bit of research on your where to send it to and your local living wage and stuff. Like maybe give yourself 10-15 minutes and just shoot off one of those letters and hopefully have your voice heard about minimum wage and living wage, because it's a big problem. It's a problem across all industries, like I said, and it's a pretty easy thing that you can do to have your voice heard and hopefully help influence change. Because also, like we talked about too, right? Prices are going up so much, and so having a minimum wage that's so much lower than living wage is just honestly crazy and really needs to change. So yeah, so take a few minutes, send off your letter. There's templates down below which you can use for any country. I mean, if you're in Canada, for sure grab one of those templates. You can definitely use them for other countries and just adapt them a bit as well. And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Again, let's do this again. This was fun. Got our little mending patches done, which I'm thrilled about. And yeah, I'm gonna say goodbye and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Hopefully there's some sunshine where you are as well. I'm gonna go out and enjoy some finally warm weather and sunshine that we've been having. So yeah, thanks again for joining me. And hopefully I'll see you again next month or sometime soon. All right. Bye.